We have well over 100 individuals RSVP for this lunch and learn. We apologize we could not produce that many steaks and shrimp for individuals that would like it, but we hope that you have your own lunch because we have some information that we want to share. LA gave you a brief synopsis of the Black Alliance. One of the things that we really like to do in these conversations is really unpack behind the scenes of what happened during one of the most historic elections of our lifetime. And to help me unpack exactly what took place in this election cycle are a host of individuals that represent various segments of engagement in Black voter engagement and voter turnout across North Carolina. And one of the things I'm very excited about is the thoroughness of which these groups and these individuals have led. And I hope that you'll see a lot more than what you think about when you think about election turnout. A lot of times when folks look at the election, they think about the Democrats or Republicans, and then they use those metrics to determine how the Black community engaged in the election. When in fact, we know that there was an immense amount of voter suppression. There, because of COVID-19, there were restrictions that required additional support at the polls. And there were organizations that were committed in rural areas to make sure that folks had the information they needed to make the intelligent choice at the ballot box. And so this behind the scenes snapshot, this 2020 election review and the next steps ahead is a part of a series of conversations that we'll be conducting to really help us lay out the groundwork for what we need to do, not just for the next 2 years, but until we get to another census in 2030. And so I'm excited. We're going to jump right into it. Our very first speaker is someone that has produced countless research for our communities across North Carolina. In this current phase, he serves the North Carolina Justice Center as a policy analyst. And I would like to turn the panel over first to Dr. William Munn.
Thanks so much, Brother Bass. I appreciate it. I'm going to fire things up here. All right. Yeah. Again, thank you so much for that kind introduction. And my role here today is sort of just to lay out what the trends were for voter turnout and with regard to African Americans in North Carolina in 2020. Um, So here's a couple of top line data points. There were right before the election last year. There were about 7.3 million registered voters. And North Carolina turned out 75% of those voters, so about 5.5 million of those voters voted. 2.6 million registered Democrats right before the election, 75% turnout. So equates to almost 2 million registered Democrats voting in 2020. There were about 2.2 registered Republicans who voted at 82% turnout, which equated to about 1.83 million registered Republicans voting in 2020. So that's sort of the high level there. Sort of want to take a look specifically at turnout by race. So to take a sort of a structural view here, whites, there were about 4.7 million registered white voters, about 1.5 million Black registered voters, almost about 230,000 Hispanic voters, about 100,000 Asian voters, and about 56,000 Native American registered voters in the state of North Carolina. So white voters in general voted at a 79% clip, 68% turnout for African Americans, 59% for Hispanics, 72% for Asians, and for Native Americans, about 63% turnout. So what that equates to is this. You had about 3.7 million whites vote who cast ballots in the 2020 election. About 1 million for African Americans, 134,000 Hispanics cast ballots, about 75,000 Asians, and looking at about 35,000 Native Americans who cast ballots. And so of great interest to this conversation, obviously, are the potential increase of ballots as we look forward. What are those ballots that who are those people that we can go get, who we can engage in the future. And so, looking at again about the 1 million ballots from African Americans who were cast that were cast in 2020, there's still about 486,000 ballots there in throughout the state that we can get, and so it's an incredible upside as we look towards building a voter coalition that's going to deliver the legislative outcomes that we all need in this state. So I think the natural question is, where are these votes? And one of my partners and I have been looking at the Black eligible voting population and how that has increased over the last couple of years. And so to sort of get an idea of where these votes are, we looked at the Black eligible voting population, Black registered voters, the actual Black voter, the Black turnout in 2020. Did a little bit of analysis, and we wanted to determine sort of where were the new Black votes to turn out as we look towards the future. And it's not in the places where you might expect. It's not in the Mecklenburgs or the Wakes or the Guilfords and the Forsyths, but it's in the northeastern parts of the state, what I would call the Black Belt of North Carolina, and really the heart and soul of Eastern North Carolina. And so a lot of analysis forthcoming. Really excited about that work that we're delving into. But it looks like there has to be special attention given to that, and not to take away from the incredible work that's already been done. I'm just speaking from some experiences I've had with a certain state party who continuously overlooks this part of North Carolina to their detriment. So this is again the black eligible voting population and the people of color in North Carolina in terms of voting population increases is untapped potential, and we just looking forward to working with all of you in the future to maximize that. So when you look at black voter turnout in 2020, 2016, 2020, and 2012, you'll see overall not a huge drop, right? So in 2012, you saw when Barack Obama was on the ballot, all black voters in North Carolina turned out about 70%. When Trump was on the ballot in 2016, that dropped to 64%, but it clipped back up to 68% in this last election. But that only tells part of the story, right? So when we take a look at black voter turnout by age category, we see a very different story. We see older North Carolinians, and as the mouse is moving, it's actually looking at 18 to 25. We see a voter turnout, even when Barack Obama was on the ballot, at 61%, falling to 48% in 2016, and then 49% in 2020. For 26 to 40, not much better. 63% in 2012, 55 in 2016, and 55 again in 2020. So no movement there in the last two presidential cycles. But when you get to 41 to 65 and 65 plus, their voter turnout or voter participation actually increased with time. So starting at 76%, but for each group respectively, ending with 82 and 78% respectfully. And so not here to sort of try to figure out why, but just wanted to lay the groundwork around around where we are in terms of turnout. So I took a look at percent change from 2012 to 2020 in terms of age groups. And so the more red a county is, the more that particular age group actually declined in voter turnout. And so looking at 18 to 25, this really quantifies on a county level how much ground we lost in terms of voter turnout and voter participation between the ages of 18 to 25 from 2012 to 2020. And so basically all you do is take a look at the voter turnout for a particular group in 2012, and then subtract that from 2020. And so what you find here is that again in that heart of eastern North Carolina, particularly with Hertford County, you see a drop of 27 points. Now, that may not be all a function of just not going to the polls. That could be out migration. That could be folk in that age group actually, that actual age population group dropping. There's a lot of reasons for that, but it is a lot of reason to concern for concern. One county to keep your eye on in terms of persistent drops in turnout has been Robeson County. But again, the eastern part of the state, the ninth congressional district in general, has seen a dramatic drop in turnout in the ages of 18 and 25. Not much better for 26 to 40 either. I mean, I think you have more pronounced declines. Same issue in Hertford County, Wilson County, particularly a significant drop in Robeson County there, and again along the ninth congressional district in Mecklenburg, not great. But in the 26 to 40 age cohort, you do see declines. So as we're thinking about the next generation, the black electorate, I think it's important to be able to quantify and to be able to spatially locate where these declines are actually happening. So for the 41 to 65 age cohort, this is a cohort that we can probably depend on for the next couple of cycles. We have brighter news in Hope County, the county I actually live in. You see a significant increase in percentage or change, percent change or percent participation with regard to voter participation, and it's just incredible to see the hot spots in the actual flip for this age group. And then in general, you had no drop off across the state when you're talking about voter turnout for ages 65 plus. That it's a remarkable thing to see. But I think when we're thinking about strategically how to engage and what kind of conversations we're having, it's really important to see where the declines are occurring, both spatially and with regard to age. And this is my last slide. In an attempt to sort of figure out to see if there's any relationship between voter turnout, I wanted to see was there any relationship between a county's median household income, which is on the x-axis, the axis going left to right, and then if there was any relationship between that 18 to 25, that critical group, 18 to 25 black voter turnout, and that's going from up to down. And so, theoretically, we would love for all of our counties to be on the upper right hand corner of this graph, because that would let you know that there's more money in these counties and then obviously more participation. But as we know, with the socioeconomic structure of our state, going all the way back to sharecropping and slavery, there are counties that have been handicapped, and their median household income is going to stay on the more on the left part of this graph. But as you do see a relationship. You do see the tier one counties, which most economically depressed counties. You do see them stay toward the left, and you see you do see I would say a moderate relationship between median household income, where generally a county's wealth indicator. You do see a relationship between that and youth voter turnout. And so I think one could probably ascertain that if young folk don't see their economic prospects, or if they're, being economically oppressed, then or they're trying to make ends meet, then voting in that group isn't always going to be the most important thing on their agenda. You do see the size of the dots represent the population of the counties, and I do have this interactive graphic on my website, so you can actually mouse over the dots and tell which county is which. Yellow counties, yellow dots are tier 2 counties, and white dots are tier 3. And so you can probably safely assume what's Mecklenburg and Wake all way off to the side. But it is very interesting to take a look at this as just one of the numerous drivers of voter turnout and voter engagement. Again, this is no indictment on the incredible work that many of my colleagues on this panel have been doing. Just sort of a snapshot of where we are here in 2020. And so with that, I will yield back my time and be happy to answer any questions once we get to the end.
Dr. Munn, thank you so much. It is refreshing to see data on us rather. So many times we have to pick apart crosstabs to figure out where we were on the spectrum. And oftentimes, because there's not a lot of solid research, the Black community gets scapegoated for not being able to toe the line of a particular party. And I think in this case, it's important for us to see the indicators across the state, to see some of the socioeconomic lay on top of the voter turnout to really tell a story that is really more dynamic than what we typically get on a CNN or a Fox News or an MSNBC. So we really appreciate you laying that groundwork. If you could put your website in the chat so individuals that are
For
wanting
sure.
to look at some of those graphs and charts as they formulate their questions for the end can do so. And we are going to, throughout this conversation, we're going to dive in and out from a statewide perspective to a laser focus on particular areas or parts of the state. And for our next panelist, I'm very excited to have Ms. Valerie Jordan, who is a board member for Gateway CDC. She'll explain what that is in a few moments, but is a leader among leaders in regards to making sure not just for voter turnout, but resources for our community are provided. Individuals have the tools that they need to be successful inside and outside of election cycles. And at this time, she's going to give you a perspective particularly related to Warren, Vance County, and the greater Eastern North Carolina area. Valerie, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much, Brother Marcus. A little bit about Gateway CDC. Gateway CDC was founded by our Honorable Andrea Harris. And again, it was definitely the goals to do community development across rural areas, specifically in that particular location. We continue to definitely try to revamp that so we can provide various methods of housing, rehabilitation, but also, as you just mentioned, community resources. So I give honor to her on today as she would like for us to continue to do all the great work. So thank you again, ladies and gentlemen, for attending today's webinar. And I am definitely pleased to talk about a perspective that I have coming from my hometown, as well as the areas in which we definitely are seeing some critical needs. I'm going to spend the next 2 to 3 minutes just talking about something that's near and dear to our heart that can give us a little bit of historics as where we are and where we're going. With that, I have a poem that I wanted to share with you that I often relate back to when I talk about Soul City, North Carolina. Imagine a city without prejudice, a city without poverty, a city without slums, a city tailor-made for industrial, a city with a booming economy, a brand new shining city with open spaces, trees and grass, rolling hills, soft winds, fresh air, clear skies where stars and moon are visible, clean water, lakes, creeks, ponds, springtime weather, hardly any snow, yet distant mountains, ample schools, hospitals, parking, recreation, well-built, stylish housing, a master plan, but not sterile and cold. For a city conceived with just an eye for bricks and mortar is a city without a soul. The bold alternative, Soul City, North Carolina. Let me tell you a little bit about Soul City, North Carolina, that still exists in North Carolina, that's right at the Virginia border. This was a goal set by Floyd McKissick Sr., and his son now is Commissioner of Public Utilities, as well as had a great career in public service, Floyd McKissick Jr. So a look back at the rise and fall of Soul City has so many different lessons for us today as we consider where we're going, from everything from federal funding all the way down to racial and social injustices. Elections has its consequences, and that's why we must stay focused and move forward, and why today we're talking about the things that we're going to continue to do. So it was intended to be a new town that was built from the ground up on all of the open spaces for all races, but it actually had an emphasis on providing opportunities for minorities and people who, like me, we were poor. Agriculture. I spent my entire youth working in the tobacco fields and picking cucumbers. So I understand what it was actually, the mandate was, it was all about. So the city was planned to have 3 villages that contained housing for about 18,000 people in 1989. So imagine that. It also had a projection of, establishing 2,400 jobs, as well as everything from, school, shopping, healthcare, and worship in our town. So again, this organization was definitely an envision by McKissick, in which he could do private partner participation in community, and we can all live in harmony. But here was the deal. Now, the deal was that he had to make was between him and the Nixon administration. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I understand that politically some people question. And what he had to do was he switched parties in the 1960s. That is correct. But here's the thing. He never ever gave up on his goal, which was about civil rights and labor union credentials. So with that being said, what he was able to help us to do is he was able to help us to address how he was able to shift civil rights organizations' missions from nonviolent tactics pretty much to the Black Power doctrine, i.e. Soul City. But let's talk about what happened in 1974. Election has its consequences, as we talked. There was the senator from North Carolina named Jesse Helms, who thought things were a little different. So with that being said, there was a rise and decline in Soul City. So with that being said, all of these great, exciting families that moved from the urban cities, New York, New Jersey, they were looking for settling to make progress in a wonderful city that had constructions of roads, daycares, healthcare systems, various things. It was about 5,200 square feet of just industrial living and residential community care. The city failed. It failed because it never reached its full ambitions. Now, I've talked to several people, such as my mentor, Lou Myers, and one of the things that he discussed with me was because there was, listen to this, some falseness which prevented them to continue to grow. Lawsuits, investigations, the use of the funds. So basically what that happened is it resulted in the foreclosure in 1979. Now today, it's about 35 housing units. We had a former clinic, tennis court is still there and a pool was developed. But it had about 150 people that was employed in the city. So what I'm saying to us today is, where do we go from here? We actually had a pioneering opportunity, which is still there, and I still want to make sure everyone knows that there is history that we have right here that we can still move forward. This gives us the opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, to make sure that we continue to understand the economics and the social opportunities that we have in our voting privileges. So thank you again, Brother Bass. I know there's a lot of people here on the panel, but again, I just wanted to just segue from Dr. Munn's, the way that he broke it down to where it looks like from a voting pattern, but I also just wanted to remind everyone that we do have strong histories and that we should definitely take it very serious as we continue to grow our message. And that's basically all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Sister Jordan, for laying the context. So many times we forget recent history, and when we talk about what we need to do in our communities, sometimes we forget where we've come from. And I think Soul City is a perfect example of not just individuals having the gumption to want to do, but also the systemic barriers from us being able to create our own thriving communities. And so I'm excited to hear about Soul City. I've learned a lot about Soul City and different individuals that are close to Soul City. I know on the line, we're seeing some folks that actually are natives of Soul City. And I think it's very important that we forget that we do not forget that there is another rise in this process that is happening right now. Individuals are recognizing the benefit of having something that was carved out on our own, of our own. We have historically Black colleges, we have historically Black churches, we have historically Black communities. And it is that type of investment that helps us show voters that their vote matters, that it can actually go towards creating vibrant communities and thriving communities. And I know the work that you did in Warren and Vance County significantly helped to remind individuals across those areas of the importance of sticking to the democratic process for the greater good, just as former Senator McKissick did. Thank you very much. For those of you that are just joining, thank you so much for joining our panel discussion on the 2020 election and steps forward. We've heard at the beginning, at the top of the program, from Dr. Will Munn, who laid out some data and research in regards to Black voter turnout. We've just taken a deep dive into one specific area in North Carolina that saw a historic amount of turnout, resulting in maintaining a seat for a Black legislator in North Carolina. We have to make sure that we recognize that. And now we're going to take another dive out and look at the state as a whole. One of the bigger issues that faced voters is a historic wave of voter suppression. Not since the 1960s did we see the level of violence and threats of violence at the polls. And one of the more important things that had to be elevated in this is a platform by which to safely make sure our voters had the resources that they needed, the protection that they needed, and the encouragement that they needed. And it is my pleasure to introduce the resiliency coordinator for Blueprint North Carolina, who will share a little bit behind the scenes, not just about GOTV, because that's only part of it, but getting out the protection and making sure our voters were prepared at the polls, whatever may have come. And so at this time, I would like to turn the presentation over to Resiliency Coordinator for Blueprint, Ms. Wanda Hunter.
Thank you, Marcus. I'm just elated to be on the panel, and this is like my second dose of Black Joy today. The National Black Women's Roundtable, they are hosting their annual event right now, and I got to hear from the vice president and a lot of other powerful Black women across the nation talking about what they are doing in reference to voters' rights. So that gave me a little boost for what I have to do today to talk about North Carolina. So I'm just going to share my screen. All right. So Blueprint North Carolina is a partnership organization, and we are also a C3. And some of the things that we focus on are independent power for anti-racist and inclusive democracy. And we believe that to have that inclusive democracy, it requires open, reflective, and responsive governing institutions. And we know that structural racism and economic inequalities shrink and weaken the democratic process. So through the laws, practices, and culture that have been too long excluded, many of our Black people, people of color, poor and working class people, women, LGBTQ, people with disabilities from access and representation. So those are some of the communities that we try to help work alongside to bridge those gaps. So this is just some of the background of who Blueprint is as a whole. As Mr. William Munn, the data expert, talked about, the voter turnout was 75%, and this is the highest turnout ever. So it was phenomenal to have that turnout, and then just to know that Blueprint played a part in how that turnout came out. So when we look at it by county, Chatham County had the highest voter turnout, and then Onslow County had the lowest voter turnout. In early voting, we saw that 3.5 million people voted early. 65% of the ballots that were cast during early voting, and 18% of the ballots were absentee, which was up 4% from 2016. Now, this is just a map showing the Latinx turnout by county. And you can see that Wake County was one of the top counties where the Latinx population turned out. Now, this one shows the Black turnout by county, and in that highest percentage was Cabarrus County. And when we talk about the Asian population, the highest turnout for the Asian population was in Union County. And this is just a table that shows everything that Mr. Munn just explained on his graph. That was, it was depicted a little bit differently, but it shows the exact same thing about the different age groups and the races and how they turned out to vote. Now, when we talk about GOTV, specifically with Blueprint, we had several different ways that we tried to do the get out to vote. With mail, we sent out almost 3 million attempts. Phone banking, we had over 1,672,000 attempts. We sent over more than 3 million text messages. We had canvassing, we knocked over 200,000 doors, and we had literature drops of over 17,000. So those are the different methods that we utilized and tracked to see how we tried to get people out to vote. So with Blueprint, we have what we call a universe, and we also have what we call moms, which are members of our members. So if it's an organization that has a membership, those members are the moms. So 90% of our moms voted in the 2020 general election. And 76% of our universe voted in the 2020 general election. And of the 400,000 people who did not vote, 95% of those people were of color. And the vast majority were Black and then Latinx people. And it was interesting that it wasn't based on the vote propensity scale. So it was evenly spread. So in vote propensity just tells you like how likely somebody is to vote. So even though some people are more likely to vote, they would have a higher voter propensity scale, but this showed that people who did not vote were across the board. So with some people that normally voted that didn't vote, and then people that don't vote that didn't vote. So it was across the scale, evenly spread. So with the pandemic, Blueprint was looking for a way to get out the vote. And we developed a program called PP&E at the polls, Power, Protection, and Encouragement. This was one of my brainchilds, and it came to me off of the PP&E during the pandemic and what it stood for. And people look at it as personal protective equipment. And I said, how do we transform this to something that will grab the attention of the people so that we can get them to come out to cast their ballots? And so with power, it's defined as the possession of control, authority, or influence over something or someone. And that's how I came up with the logo also, was the fist. The power is exercised at the ballot box, which determines which candidate will win. And that's how I determined that power was something that we needed to have in this election because we wanted to change who we were going to see in that presidential seat. The protection is the action of protecting, and that's why I had the shield with the arrows in the logo. The protection was needed from not only the elements of the pandemic, but also the political climate of intimidation. So for the pandemic, we created the safety kits, and for the political climate, we created safety teams to give people the protection that they needed when they came to the polls to cast their ballots. Encouragement is the action of giving someone support, confidence, or hope. And that's where I came up with the heart that's on the logo. The encouragement was based on the evidence-based experiment that we did in 2018 called Party at the Polls. And when we did Party at the Polls, we showed that it was an increase in voter turnout. This time, we just had to take precautions but utilize that same method to encourage people to come out. So if there were long wait lines, how do we encourage people to stand in the wait lines? We provided refreshments, we provided food, we provided music. Those were the things that were encouraging to people to make them stay the course. So with this program, we lead by example. Our roles were stipended. We paid people for the work, and that's what we believe in at Blueprint. If we have our people out here doing the work, we're not volunteering our people to come out here and do the work. We're going to pay them like they should be paid for the work. So we just had 5 roles: the organizational host, the coordinator, program lead, the safety team lead, and the safety lead. And a part of our, the pledge that had to be taken with being a part of Safe Sites was the NC4BL pledge. Now, this pledge is a pledge to protect Black lives, because we were one of the groups that were being intimidated at the polls. And we also wanted to address the anti-Blackness and white supremacy in one's respective community. So we wanted to make sure that polling places were safe places where people could go to cast their ballot. And I will put in the chat the link to the NC4BL pledge if you're interested, and I'll also put the text information. Now, we had 87 organizations across the state who participated. We held 750 events at 220 polling locations. And these are just some pictures from several events that took place. We covered 64 counties, and that was more than we had even imagined to do. And it was a hefty task to take on, but we did it with grace. So at these events, there were celebrities. The Baby made a show in Charlotte. There was music. Many of the DJs lost business because the city was shut down, but this gave them an opportunity to earn revenue also. There was food from several different ways people purchase stuff. We had vendors. Ben and Jerry's has always been an ally with social justice movements, and they came out. And then there was fun. All organizations created their own fun and what they saw respective for their community to encourage their communities to come out. So this was autonomous to the grassroots organizations, which we are finding now, or people are paying attention now and listening, that grassroots organizations know how to get their communities out to do different activities, and voting is one of them. There was also fellowship. So just meeting the different organizations, finding out what they stand for, knowing that they are in your community, and knowing who you can lean on. And we had plenty of swag that we spread out across the state. So when you see people with these yellow Count Every Vote sweatshirts, or these power protection and encouragement sweatshirts, just remember they came from the PP&E at the polls. And so that's what PP&E at the polls was, and that's how we got people out to the polls, was with this initiative.
Wanda, that was excellent. A lot of people don't realize how much it took in 2020 to let people know that it was safe to go vote, to put folks in community that were friendly faces, familiar faces, that helped to usher in an element of power, protection, and encouragement. And I really thank you for really peeling back some of what happened. And we already see, I know Danielle is gonna spend a lot of time in Georgia, and saw the necessity even there for making sure that we created safe spaces for people to vote. And it's interesting that we're having to do that 55, 60 years after the civil rights movement. The Voting Rights Act having been repealed less than a decade ago, and organizations are still having to hold the line in that way. And we are definitely thankful and fortunate for your work at Blueprint. The executive director, Serena Sebring, and the whole entire team there really working to make sure people are protected and encouraged. And I think that there are ways that folks can join or connect with Blueprint, and definitely will make sure we get that information to all the individuals on the panel today. I now am excited about this next conversation that we will be held. We're taking you from a state level, going very specific again. And in this case, we're taking you all the way to Greenville, North Carolina, Pitt County to be specific, where one of our partner members and one of our very faithful organizers in community, Ms. Tanya Foreman, has been leading a group that has been supporting, even after the election, supporting not just the vote, but the vaccination process. And at this time, I would like to turn the conversation over to Ms. Tanya Foreman. Tanya, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I am so happy to be part of this conversation, and so excited to have been able to collaborate with people whose passion matches ours to be part of the solution as we move forward to keep our community engaged so that we can make change. Wanted to, highlight, Marcus mentioned that I'm the founder of a nonprofit organization called CARE, and CARE stands for Citizens Advocating for Racial Equity and Equality. Also a member of NC Black Alliance and Advanced Carolina. And to piggyback on what Wanda was just saying, we are one of those grassroots organizations that put boots on the ground in 2021 so that we can navigate the barriers that I would say, I wouldn't even say presented themselves as much as I would say exacerbated itself during the pandemic. 2020 was a very dynamic year. Just to take us back a little bit to the Ahmaud Arbery situation and the George Floyd situation, where it was just such a climate, again, that exacerbated the level of social and racial injustice that we experience day to day. To give you a little bit of history, I grew up with my mother being very involved with SCLC. And through that, I was blessed enough to have shared the space with people like Ralph Abernathy and Golden Franks, Joseph Lowry, and particularly when they were doing planning for and strategizing for upcoming events. As we were observing what was going on during 2020, one of the things that really caught our attention was how the national media was shifting the narrative from the efforts that were being made on the ground by African Americans to negative narratives, and saw a strong need to, number one, what I noticed a huge difference from what I experienced when I was young is that was more difficult to do because they spent so much time planning, strategizing, and training that whenever they were marching or hosting an event, they had trained people for what they were to do when they got there. They had set expectations for how they were to conduct themselves. And because of that, they knew who was supposed to be there. So if someone showed up that had not gone through the training, they could recognize them and identify that and address it immediately. So seeing that need, we wanted to be active in that. And then number two, we wanted to take that energy and that momentum and redirect it or use that momentum to create an innovative approach to the barriers that had exacerbated itself by trying to function in a pandemic. With that, we built our team and identified community partners and focused our efforts on voter registration and education, as well as assisting people with the process of participating in the absentee ballot process. With that, we engaged local citizens, and we realized that, again, to reiterate what both Wanda and another young lady said earlier, that, you know, that people know more about their communities than you do often. And so we weren't walking in trying to be the expert. We got them involved in the process. From that, we were able to generate an innovative approach that included pop-up tents. We created pop-up tents and set them up like an office, complete with plexiglass barriers, so that we could go out in the community. I could keep my volunteers safe as well as the community safe, and get people engaged in the voting process. We also worked with local barbers and businesses and provided them with toolkits and voter registration information and education so that they could register people on site at their locations. We worked with senior apartment complexes and other senior organizations to assist them in one, educating them on and assisting them with understanding the absentee ballot process and providing them the tools needed to navigate that process successfully. And then followed up with them to make sure that their votes were counted. And then we also organize collaborative efforts with other community members to offer community events. And through that process, it ended up being very successful with both registering people to vote, having people participate in the absentee ballot process, but also doing voter confirmation for those people that were registered and might have been purged, because North Carolina purged more than 500,000 voters in 2020. And so there were people who thought they were registered and found out that they weren't. And so we were able to identify that in the moment and register them. But through that personal touch, we were able to engage local citizens and get them involved in both the canvassing, strategic planning. In the strategic planning, it was important to us that we included all ages, people from various geographic locations in our community, and all socioeconomic statuses. And they were able to help us navigate that process as we distributed PPE kits and assisted people with manning the polls also. From that, as we move forward, what I see and what we have continued to assess is a need for a call to action. We are functioning in a time where they talk about things as if it was in the past, but I think that we're experiencing it today more than ever as it relates to suppression. I've been having conversations with our partners with NC Black Alliance and Advanced Carolina, and identifying the fact that they really pay close attention to our efforts in 2020. And they are trying to pick off those things that were successful one by one. If we pay attention to what's going on with Senate Bill 300, Senate Bill 100, SB 101, they're trying to paralyze our efforts. And so we are functioning in a time where we cannot afford not to be active. And so, you know, with that being said, we're moving forward. We did not stop on November the 3rd. Our processes have been ongoing as we continue to identify ways to assist our community. And what we noticed is, and what they have told us, is that we need ongoing engagement. And so we have been creating ongoing relationships with our elected officials and getting them involved with our processes so that they have more visibility. We've been educating our citizens on what's happening and how that relates to them. One of the things that we noticed is that many of our citizens were not voting down ballot, but they weren't voting, making that choice because they weren't interested. They were making that choice because they simply did not know. They did not know who people were. They did not know what people were doing or why they were on the ballot. And so they would just skip that. And so we are putting together efforts right now through publishing efforts and things of that sort to keep our community informed. And we have a continued focus on voter registration, but we also are really increasing our focus on voter engagement for those people that are already registered. And the reason that we're doing that is for our local elections, we noticed that only about 28% of our registered voters are participating. To give an example, our mayor won the last election with less than 6,500 votes. And so part of that education is letting our voters that are already registered know what is going on and why these things are important, and helping them connect the dots to understand that these things are affecting your everyday life. And again, to reiterate who they're supporting and what they're doing and how this is affecting you and your community. With that being said, our efforts were really successful, but to reiterate what Marcus said, we have expanded beyond the voter registration and engagement to COVID-19, and are now putting efforts in place to make sure that our people are getting an equitable opportunity to get vaccinated, and even connecting those dots, because the disparities that exist for our community go across the board. So as we move forward, again, we're focusing on a call to action. We're realizing that our activism will lead to an abolitionist movement to address some of these things that are happening, not just on a local level, but on a state level and a national level as we address these issues. Because again, they have identified what worked for us in 2020, and they don't plan for that to be successful for us moving forward.
Tanya, thank you so much for the work you're doing. We want to thank everyone for sticking in with us. We know we like to stay and need to stay to the benediction, to the very end, because the best part is at the end. And I want to thank you all that have stuck in with us for this 2020 election turnout and the path forward. Our next presenter takes us not just on a state level, but on a national level. We have been fortunate to have a national partner and a national ally in Black Voters Matter. And their state director, Danielle Brown, who comes to Black Voters Matter by way of NCAPRI. I got to shout out APRI and the work that you all are doing on a major level across the state. Now Danielle comes to us to share with us from a national perspective, laser focused on North Carolina, laser focused on the South, exactly what impact means. So we appreciate everyone for sticking in with us. We have a very important and special announcement at the end, but at this time, I would like to turn the panel over to Dr. Danielle Brown.
Oh, I got a new title today. All right. Appreciate it. Good to see everyone. Thank you all so much for having me today on this wonderful panel. I have learned so much just in this short amount of time being with these remarkable folks that are on here. But as we talk about North Carolina and we talk about, you know, what we've done and how we've done it and the great work that we've done, we have all the pieces to do whatever we want to do. And that is what I keep saying to folks when they ask me, specifically ones that know that I've been in Georgia during the runoff. They're like, how did they do this? How did they do that? Oh, we need to be the next Georgia. So yeah, we are not Georgia. Let's get that straight right now. We are not Georgia. Who we are is North Carolina, and what we do and what we do great is in North Carolina. So with that being said, you know, we can take pieces from Georgia, we can emulate certain things from Georgia, but we have to make it our own because we are North Carolina and we do things our way. So once we get past that, we can have the results of Georgia. We can have that. We've seen it in the past. That's the thing. We've seen what we can do, and we've seen how we can do it and what we do great. And some of the work that we do so great is getting people out here, getting people motivated, laying into our culture, laying into our Black joy magic. That's what we do. That's how we make things happen, is we relate to people and we relate to them like no other. We bring a piece of us to the table and we say, you know what, this is who we are, and this is how we're going to make this happen. We are not, a lot of people tried to make COVID-19 our voter suppression. That was the thing. They really tried to say, count us out of it. But when it's all said and done, no, we are overcomers. Y'all been working on voter suppression. Y'all spend a ton of money, you spend a ton of resources and all these other kind of things to ensure that we are suppressed, oppressed, and omitted. But guess what? We show out every single time. That's what we do, because we are Black folks and we know how to overcome the cultural stigma of what you want us to say. We no longer take that on. We say, no, we're who we are. We're what we do. And so we tell people all the time, when they try to count us out, we move 10 steps forward. But of course, they tried in 2021 to bring us 20 steps back. But I got news for you, y'all. Our ears are to the ground. We hear you. We are in these legislative meetings. They're virtual, so y'all make it a lot easier for us right now. We are hearing what you're saying. We are hearing what you're trying to do to us, and we're saying no more. We're saying we are 365 bases. We are retraining our funders. We are retraining our communities. We are retraining our activists. We are retraining our political leaders. That is what we're doing to be able to build on a national platform and to be the greatest that we can be here in North Carolina. I tell people all the time, check your voter registration like you check your bank account. Why? Because they are forever trying to get into your account. They are forever trying to omit you from the situation and from the progress. And when you check your account, like you check your voter registration like you check your bank account, you stop them in their tracks from doing that. But how do we do that? We have to educate our folks. We have to, like Ms. Tanya said, there's a lot of people that just don't know. That is the problem. They don't know. So by us going out here and educating and being on a 365 basis, never stopping after November the 3rd and continuing the work ongoing, we continue to build, and we continue to build not only people in our community, but those next political leaders that get us and understand who we are and who we can vote for in the future. We build our own platforms. Not only are we building our own platforms, but we're building our own policies. We're saying no more. You will no longer write a policy for us that will allow and tell us how we are going to live. We will write our own policies and give it to you, and then galvanize around it and tell you how we will live. That is what we're doing on a 365 basis. And it's really important that people also understand that we hold the key to all of this. I put on social media yesterday that, we all may have different perspectives. We all may be partners. We may all have different agendas, but none of this moves without Black voters. None of it. And we've seen what happens when we get Black voters out, and we've seen what happens when Black voters don't come out. None of this moves without Black voters. We are that hope diamond. We are that next piece that you want to see and want to be. We are the Black folks that's coming for you. That's what it is. And y'all, they big mad. They're big mad. And you know what? I enjoy your anger. Thank you for it. We appreciate it. Why? Absolutely. Because we strive and we overcome that. We pull together. We do what we have to do as a group. We may fuss, we may argue, we might have bloodshed, but when we come all out and we come together, it's a whole nother ball game. And you are afraid of that. And that's a good thing. Go ahead, be afraid of it, because we need you to be, because 2021 is more dangerous than 2020 ever was. And if we don't play our cards right, it will continue to make us more dangerous than 2022. We have to work together to do this and be a part in doing this. We have to know when it's easy, when to hand off that baton. If you're a C3 and you do voter registration, great. Do that. Go out here, do that, and do that to the best of your ability. But when it's time for GOTV, hand that baton off so the next person can roll and make sure that those voters are activated and doing what they need to do. When it's time to hand off for, I know I'm in a space right now, but when it's time to hand off to the next person that's going to say, hey, this is who we need to laser in on and who we need to be talking to, hand that baton off and let them do their job and do it well. Don't try to outdo each other. Work together. Bring it together so that when the community sees us working together, y'all, it's amazing what happens, because they're like, oh, if they can do it, we can do it too. Bring our voters in, bring those folks in, build off of that momentum that we had in 2020. We worked so hard in 2020 to get people out, building off of that momentum and saying, hey, look, We're still here. We're still doing this. What's wrong? Are you okay? Is something going on with you? What do you need? And working together to make sure that happens. Because when we all come together and we work together, we see something like no other. And we saw what we could do in 2020. We might not have always got the results we wanted across the board, but we saw what we could do in 2020. And here in North Carolina, we can do that, and we can do it so well. We work tirelessly to make sure that things happen in 2020. And we have to continue doing that in 2021 and making sure that these things don't chip away at us. And if they do try to chip away at us, y'all, we got a game plan. We got a backup plan. We know what else we got to do to make sure that we're overcoming it. Being 10 steps ahead, even though they try to pull us back 20. That is the work that we have to do. We have to be engaging. We have to bring our culture to the table like we always do. If it's food, great. Let's figure it out. Who cooking? If it's music, who playing the music? Who bringing the box? What's going on? Let's figure out what we need to do to make sure that we have folks at all times engaged, galvanized, and moving no matter what. Because at the drop of a hat, we need each other. And y'all, when it's all said and done, ain't nobody coming to save us. We always each other got. That's it. So we have to work together to make sure that folks are engaged and moving in the 2021. So part of the work that we're doing in doing that is we're reaching out. We're making sure that they don't kill us off. We're making sure that we are being protected in COVID-19. We are making sure that these vaccinations, or at least the education, is available to our communities in 2021. We are making sure that, hey, look, when it's all said and done, these are the things that we need in our communities. We're taking those vaccines and we're taking that education to our communities, because where you got it sitting at right now, we ain't going over there. It look like Fort Knox, an outbreak. Ain't nobody going over there. But when we take it to our communities and know how we do things and bring people out that way and educate them and treat this just like we treat voting, because that's what we do best, taking GOTV instead of get out to vote, turning it into get out the vaccine. When we do things of that nature and pull it in, we say, guess what? We are a part of this community. You will not kill us off. We will be here, and we will be here when it's time to go to the polls. Thank you.
There are times you drop the mic, but I don't want you to drop that laptop or that computer, because we need all of that. We need all of that. Danielle Brown, State Director for Black Voters Matter. We appreciate your remarks, and we see that we don't have to go far to look for a Stacey Abrams. You have seen different versions of a Stacey in all of the panelists, and Danielle definitely put the bow on the encouragement that we needed. As we anchor this panel, I want to answer a question, or have this last panelist answer a question that a lot of us ask. Every single time we get into voter engagement conversations, folks ask about two key communities. Where are the Divine Nine, and where is the church? But I think in this year, we haven't had to ask those questions. The Divine Nine turned out in a major way, ensuring that individuals were mobilized, joining in as partners in a lot of these different facets of conversation that you heard today. And then also the Black church. Even at the start of COVID-19, providing food and distribution for individuals that needed it, lifting up testing sites, helping fill the gap for housing needs for individuals that were housing inadequate or dealing with housing-related issues. And now, in the midst of vaccinations, the church is standing up in a major way again. And so to anchor this conversation, I know all of us have a church in our backyard, in our community. How do we begin to listen to what the church is doing and share that word to other clergy members across the state? We have Minister C.J. Brinson that is going to give us a peek inside of what the faith community has done in 2020 and where they're going moving forward. Reverend Brinson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Director Bass. So blessed to be here with all of you again today. It is Women's History Month, and Director Bass never have me go behind Dr. Brown ever again. Like Mary Magdalene, the gospel has already been preached. So I hope I have something of some sustenance to be able to follow that. As Director Bass has said, there were many questions around how Black faith spaces would be able to contribute in the year of 2020. And what we found, because of the challenges of 2020, the Black faith space has once again become the epicenter within our community. Many faith spaces became food drop-offs and being able to be distribution centers during COVID-19, as well as they were able to engage their community around the process of early voting, drop-off sites and pickup sites for voter guides, as well as they assisted many members within their congregations and local community around the absentee ballot process, which at times people found that to be very tedious, but it was a lot of faith leaders who were out in the community walking folk hand in hand through that process and helping them through that process. We had poll chaplains as well. We also had an effort around Souls to the Polls, and also that culminated into what we call the Souls Roll to the Polls campaign, where a lot of faith leaders and faith spaces were apprehensive about using their own transportation to transport people due to liability. And yet we came up with a way in which we would caravan, since we had been caravanning the whole year prior to the election, whether it had been through graduations, birthdays, or pastoral anniversaries. We were caravanning to those events. And so folks decided that they would caravan to the polls as well. And so those were just some of the ways that we found faith leaders being engaged. And then real quickly, I will show you some ways in which we as an organization, NC Black Alliance, and myself as the faith-based engagement director, we were involved as well in facilitating that process. Our faith-based engagement initially was built on our relationships going into the community around the COVID-19 response calls that we held. And many of those were held up with our established relationships with faith leaders in the community. We had various folks who helped us to hold down this work. Brother Reggie Weaver, Reverend Janet Garner Mullins, who was a part of our faith engagement team, our very own director, Marcus Bass, Kenya Myers, who was phenomenal in assisting us with many of our Souls to the Polls campaign trainings from Disability Rights NC, Jasmine Quick, a local organizer in Greensboro, Dr. Frankie Denise Powell, and as I've already mentioned, our faith engagement team. Our program was able to build over 500 contacts of faith leaders throughout North Carolina. And during that process, we were able to develop newsletters, webinars, Souls to the Polls training. We have a destination site, and as I've already mentioned to you, our Souls Roll to the Polls campaign. We also were able to develop, which has been my baby, and I will be sure to share that with you, and that is our faith-based toolkit. And so I will drop that in the chat at the end of the presentation. We were able to conduct 17 Souls to the Polls trainings, and over 295 clergy and faith leaders were trained throughout the state of North Carolina. And our Souls Roll to the Polls campaign had over 16 counties to participate. And I'm going to move real quickly through some of these events. As you can see, these were our COVID-19 response calls, where we had our clergy leaders, as you can see there, who were involved and really heavily engaged as a first entry point into the community. These are flyers from our actual Souls to the Polls trainings that we held, and we held those in partnership with organizations like the State Conference of the NAACP, as well as Forward Justice and the General Baptist State Convention. Here are pictures from our Souls Roll to the Polls campaign from all over the state of North Carolina, Rowan County, New Hanover County, Mecklenburg County. You will see faith leaders being engaged in helping folks to turn out in a meaningful way to the polls. Currently, we are engaged in what we are calling faith leader cluster meetings. These are happening all over the state. We have already conducted 2 of those, one being in Guilford, Rowan, Alamance, Mecklenburg, and Forsyth County, the other being in Bladen, Robeson, Columbus, and New Hanover County, as well as some members from Cumberland County was represented there. And basically, we are just checking in with our faith leaders in the area, finding out how they anticipate being engaged in the local municipal elections, and find out how they are engaging around helping their folks get out to the vaccine, as Dr. Brown has said, get out to the vaccine, and how they are helping to facilitate some of those efforts. And I heard Dr. Brown say she's not Dr. Brown, but that seems to have a little ring to it. And finally, once again, I'm the Faith-Based Engagement Director, and this is my contact information. Should you have any questions or concerns, or you want to get your faith space or ministerial alliance involved in our program so that we can be a resource to you as well. Thank you.
We want to thank all of our participants for joining in this panel discussion. As we go into our question and answer, we would like to invite you all for a double dose. If you like what you heard today, if you like to deep dive into the data, if you like to dive into the discussion around the different parts of the state, the different levels of engagement, we ask that you don't miss this special opportunity to join our virtual North Carolina Black Summit. We've been doing this Black Summit now for the past 16 years. This event is typically held in Raleigh around May, every year, April and May. And this year, in this virtual format, we're able to provide this experience, not just for our Black elected officials, but for individuals across the state that really want to build in coalition with organizations that are on the front lines of fighting and doing the work that we need to do to see this thing through. You can visit the website ncblacksummit.org. The dates are April 22nd through the 23rd of 2021. And this year, we've been able to provide sponsorships through scholarships for any student that wishes to participate. There's a limited number of those free tuition paid scholarships for the summit for the students. And if you're a Black elected official, there are ways that you can also, if you're a member of an organization that will want to sponsor your participation, there are many different ways that you can attend and participate in this virtual event. So we look forward to having everyone that wants to learn more, and dig deeper together to join us. As we go into the question and answer period, we want to take no more than an hour and a half of your time. We already are at the 1:22 mark. And so with the time that we have remaining, we see that there have been questions in the chat that have been answered throughout the conversation. But I do have one question for each panelist as we ramp up into the question and answer period. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat or use the Q&A feature, and we will try to get to as many as we can in the time that we have remaining. So we learned a lot, panelists, about turnout, about the different elements beyond just voter registration. We didn't even talk about voter registration. This is the first time that I've been on a panel talking about getting Black folks to vote, and we dug deeper than just registering folks. We know that it takes encouragement. We know that it takes information. We know that it takes, strong individuals in community ready to make sure that they're pointing back to the issues. And I want to thank you, Tanya, for lifting up some of the bills that are currently rolling through the General Assembly. And I think that's where our question lies first. With all that happened in 2020, and so many folks wondering where the next Stacey Abrams is going to come from, I want to hear from our panelists what you think it's going to take to make the difference in this midterm election. We know that there could be a municipal election delay because of a delay in census data. In a lot of cases, the municipal elections are going to be delayed potentially because of this delay in census. But we do know that regardless, 2022 is going to represent a monumental chance for folks to fight back, or either for the fight to come back on us as Black voters increasing engagement. So I do want to hear from any of our panelists that would like to answer this first question. What do you think we need to do in order to become prepared in 2022? And I'll give it first to Dr. Munn.
Sure thing. Thank you. I think that, and a part of this is I was on a conversation with a lady from Georgia. I can't remember her name. But I think one of the things she said was much like Dr. Brown said, was that we are not Georgia in a lot of ways. In Georgia, the Warnock election and the Ossoff election was the first time, you know, they had won an election statewide in decades, right? And so we've actually won that. We're actually ahead of the game. I think one of the things that we have to do is focus on the strengths and the gains and the infrastructure that we already have in place, and push that forward. I think that there are a lot of great things, but one thing that I think all of our partners have to recognize is that the only way that we're going to win is to explicitly focus on Black votes and getting and empowering our communities to turn out, and the understanding, you know, at the very core and at a very base level. I tell this story. I have a cousin in Union County, in the 2018 election when they were trying to get Dan McCready across the finish line. And he just frankly said, "Look, I'm tired of people coming to my door asking me to come vote. My life hasn't gotten any better since such and such, since the last administration." And so I always keep that in the back of my mind when people, you know, are coming with these, you know, pie in the sky schemes or large scale ideas or generalized ideas as to why African Americans don't vote. I think, you know, until there's the message that is relevant to young folk, that's relevant to their economic and everyday situations, then we're not going to be very successful in terms of turning folk out, from a broader standpoint. So again, not speaking against anything that any of our partners here have done. It's just when I look at structures, some of our partners just don't get it, and I think, and then helping them to understand, and allow Black folk to lead, to give Black folk the power to move forward is incredibly important. So I hope that made it clear.
You made it very clear, and that takes me to our next question. I want to send this to Danielle. You mentioned something about trusting Black leadership, Dr. Munn, how in a lot of cases we depend on other organizations that don't match our background or our experience or look like us to go in and motivate us to vote. And in some cases, they use some of the same traditional cues. I always kind of often wonder why we have to go to the graveyard to dig up civil rights activists from back in the day in order to encourage people to vote when we have issues that are affecting us right now. But it seems to be those organizations are some of the first ones at our doors. Some of those people are the first folks at our churches. Danielle, I want to see what your thoughts are around Black leadership in this moment, not just from the standpoint of being in elected office, but from the standpoint of running organizations and on a local level, being able to control your own destiny. As far as the groups that you work with in Black Voters Matter, a lot of these groups are local groups. A lot of these groups are not necessarily, you know, some of these national organizations, and a lot of these groups are smaller Black-led orgs. What does that mean in this moment, and what does that say about the path forward?
So what that means in this moment is that we know what we're doing. That's what it means. It means that we've had people on the ground for years that have been doing this work, but they're not necessarily a C3 or they're a C4 or whatever. And a lot of times they don't even want that. They just want to be in their community. They just want to do the work. That's it. And a lot of them have no interest in it whatsoever. They're like, nope, I don't want that. But we know for a fact, if we go to those communities, we don't get in there without talking to Miss Mamie. We don't get in there without having that conversation with her, or even moving whatsoever. And 99.9% of the time, somebody's already called her and forewarned her that one of us is on our way, and before we even get there. So it means that we have to take the folks that live in these communities and trust them to do the work. And give them the resources to do that work. Again, retraining our funders, retraining our community activists, retraining our community in general, so that they have an understanding that this is a 365 situation. When it's all said and done, you coming in when it's time for an election is null and void. If you do not have a relationship with that community or the people or specific people in that community, you don't win. You're actually spinning your wheels, because what we don't want to see, and I grew up in a small town, so I know what it looks like. What we don't want to see is, we don't want to see people coming in, utilizing us as a number, and then turning around and leaving, and we never see, hear, or anything from them again. We are the trusted resources. So we have to engage the people that we know that are in our communities, because why? They will listen to us. If we are if we're a church, you have, I mean, I say it all the time in churches. And I've spoken it before in churches. You have a congregation that you engage every week. So those are, I obviously I trust you. I trust you with my soul. So why would I not trust you with anything else? These are the things that we have to look at when we talk about people and we talk about how we engage folks on an ongoing 365 basis, retraining that thought process, because it's not just right now. It's not just the moment of the election. It's what we go through all year long. I don't have broadband. So that's an issue for me. I don't have food. I live in a food desert. That's an issue for me. I have diabetes, but you're telling me to eat right. That's an issue for me. I don't have Medicare. That's an issue for me. So these are issues that are ongoing 365, and we have to attack those the way we know how. As us, as Black folks, the way we know how to do it. As it pertains to other political leaders coming in, well, if you have a relationship and you've been doing the work all along, when these other folks come in, they just here. That's it. They're not other folks, because obviously folks are saying, you know what, I'm going to listen to my trusted resource, the person that's been there the entire time, along the way. But the thing about it is, we have to make sure that those trusted resources have resources. So that's our job, to make sure that they have the resources to be able to do the work that they need to do on a 365 basis without creating a whole bunch of strings, because a lot of times the strings are what hang us all up.
Wanda Hunter, Blueprint, North Carolina, Tanya Foreman, NC Cares or CARE, Dr. William Munn, Justice Center, Danielle Brown, Black Voters Matter, Valerie Jordan, Gateway CDC, Reverend CJ Brinson, North Carolina Black Alliance Faith-Based Engagement Director. Thank you all so much. Thank you to the participants that have stayed on with us to the very end. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. There is a lot more in store. Someone asked about redistricting. We have to talk about redistricting. We have to talk about the municipal level election, but we also have to live our lives. And with that being said, we would like to thank you for participating in this panel discussion. We hope that you continue to engage. We hope that you've heard something or an organization that you could plug into. And we hope that we just stay connected. If we continue to work together and start getting rid of some of the divisiveness, and you heard the unity among the organizations mentioned today, then we will all get there together. But until then, we will continue to work tirelessly. We thank you so much for your support. Folks that participated across North Carolina, thank you so much. Please be safe. We're not going to tell you which vaccine to get, but we are going to tell you to be sure that you are in line. Make sure that you don't let anything stop you from getting the care and safety that you need in this moment. We bid you all a great afternoon, and we thank you for your participation in this panel. Good evening, everybody.